my dear colleagues, good morning. I just want to, our team is here now, and Alan, just wanted to thank them for the nice evening we had yesterday. Very nice meal, very nice atmosphere. It's always good to be together and exchange friendship and experiences and histories. But now we're back on track, and we start with Giuseppe with Introduction to Sustainable Development, following the agenda, and note that in the afternoon we will have mainly a virtual presentation, but I think with this setup will be perfectly fine. So without further ado, because we are very tight on the schedule, I give the floor to Giuseppe. Giuseppe, please.
Thank you, Horst. Good morning, everybody. So, we will start the day with a general introduction of what sustainable development is. I will not touch, say, topics or references to the nuclear issues, but you will recognize many of the things that were said yesterday, and you will also see in the coming days. So, basically, sustainable development. There are three basic questions. Why? Why this concept was invented? Why it is used? What is it? How we can try to define this concept? I would say more the framework that we are using, and how we measure it, how we operationalize it, okay? Because it might seem something very methodological, even philosophical, but then it has a kind of practical meaning. Well, I will try to answer very quickly all these questions, but I would like to start with something that I like a lot, is a mountain in Latin America, in Bolivia, Potosí. And I think is the symbol of unsustainability. This city was one of the richest in the world because Cerro Rico de Potosí was a mountain full of silver. All the silver that the Spanish brought in Europe came from there, basically. Okay? This was one of the richest towns in the world, and now is one of the poorest. So there is clear something that in the model didn't work well. So I think this is a very good symbol to remember, that we can be very wealthy in a given moment, we can use of the resources we have, we end up with nothing. This is exactly what sustainable development is about. As concept is quite recent, let's say in the last 3 decades more or less, but in reality it came quite far, much. There were a lot of people thinking about these issues in the past, and they had the point. One of the first one was in the 60s. You can remember, you can imagine, 60s was the period of growth, of dreams, of we can get everything we want, and this guy, Kenneth Boulding, said, no, this is not correct. This is a kind of cowboy economy, no frontier, no limit, no constraint. This doesn't work. At some stage you will find a limit, a boundary. So we have not to think to our world, to our economy as it is no limit. We have to think as we are in a spaceship. In a spaceship we have a problem. Everything has to be used in a very efficient way, because otherwise there is a collapse. And this is a very good metaphor, okay? Now anymore, this completely exploitation, no boundary, no constraints, we have to take care of what we do. What does it mean? Basically, as Horst said yesterday, we should have a transition from what to what. The linear economy is very simple. You have production, consumption, then final utility, as economists like to define. So it's very easy, okay? The more we produce, the more we have as consumption goods, the better we are. But then we have to add something very simple. From where this production is coming from? Well, from resources. Resources means natural resources, and basically two types of resources. Renewable, non-renewable. Again, here is a very simple classification in the sense that it is very human-based. Geologically speaking, this doesn't make any sense, okay? But for humans, in historical times, there is this difference. Renewable is a flow, so in principle, no problem. Non-renewable is a stock. So like the Cerro Rico de Potosí, we will get, no, there will be an end of it, okay? So we have two basic problems. Again, very important, okay? Humans, we have a big problem, not the planet as such. First problem, if non-renewable resources will get exhausted at some stage, there are two basic questions to answer. How long they will last, and what will happen when they are exhausted? So, which will be the so-called backstop technology, okay? There will be a technology substituting that resource. This is, of course, very relevant in all the energy sector, right? The energy sector is basically based on stock. So what will happen? The nuclear, for example, is or is not a backstop technology. Flow, renewable resources, in a sense, it's easy. We have to find correct management rules in a way that they can last forever. Then we will see if this is the reality or not, but in theory, the two problems are very clear, okay? Stock, how long this will last, what is going to happen when it is exhausted, minerals, oil, etc. Renewable is a flow, so no problem, it might be water, land also, okay? But then is all biodiversity. We can manage it in a correct way or not. There is also another issue here. That's the reason why it begins from linear to circular. Waste. All the extraction, production, consumption creates waste. This waste goes necessarily to the environment. Here there is also, in a sense, an issue that is, can we recycle all this waste? Because if we get the waste can become again a resource, there is no problem, no? We are back to transforming something that was a subproduct in something useful. And this, of course, is the circular economy about, no? The more we can recycle, the better. There is an obvious issue, okay? From the practical point of view, you know that not everything can be recycled. Some of this goes to the environment. And there is also a theoretical limit, where again, in the 70s, much before the concept of sustainable development was developed, one of the first thinkers about the issues was a Romanian economist, Nicolas Georgescu-Regan. He wrote a very influential book called The Entropy Law and Economic Process. And he says something very clever. Entropy applies to energy, but it also applies to matter, not in physical terms, in economic terms. That's very important. In which sense? You can, in principle, recycle whatever. Okay, you have a glass bottle. If it is all the glass everywhere, you can physically recycle everything. But economically, the cost will be enormous. So the so-called entropy law applied to waste is not really a physical law, it's an economic law. The cost will be very, very high. So what basically Georgescu said was, okay, take care, we cannot recycle everything. That's a cost to it. So again, we find limits. Some of these limits are natural, are constraints that physically are imposed to the humans, to the economic process, other are economic limits, okay? Everything has a cost, and we cannot afford whatever cost. So this, again, you can imagine that the issue of sustainable development then is not a simple one. There are basic questions, they are very complex. They appear simple, but they are not. The first thing we have to think about sustainability is that we are dealing with complex issues. There is no simple answer, but there are very, very clear questions, and they are not easy to answer. If you use this model, again, we can complicate it as much as we can. So basically we say, okay, we have from the very simple linear process you might find in whatever book in microeconomics even today. In reality, things became much more complex because you have the classical circular flows inside the economics. So, okay, you know, people work, they get money, with this money they buy goods, etc., etc. So it's very simple. But then we discovered that, okay, the market doesn't work alone. We need institutions behind the market. This is also quite an important point. But on top of everything, there are physical constraints, the earth. This looks very simple picture, but has an important immediate meaning, which is the meaning that we cannot grow forever. That's very important, and this was not at all clear, and even nowadays is not that clear. Okay, we always think about economic growth, how GDP is growing, etc. This is normally considered a positive thing, no? We talk about developing economies, etc. So the idea is that to grow, to have more development, meaning more economic activity is good. Okay, it is good, but as another one of the fathers, we are already close when the sustainable development concept was invented, Mandela said, okay, but the scale of the economy necessarily has a limit. It's a bit back to the spaceship economy. If there is a limit to the scale, we cannot grow forever because the planet is finite. It's very easy in a sense. The planet is finite. The economy cannot be infinite. So at some stage we have to stop growing. Otherwise it will be a collapse. So it looks something immediately simple, but it took years and years to realize that this is the truth. Sorry. So, what is the basic premise of sustainable development? It's a kind of pessimistic one. The premise is that economic growth, more and more GDP, a bigger scale of the economy, plus population growth, the fact that population is becoming more and more, then this will create a disruption. The scale, the human scale becomes too big, and then we get a problem, environmental destruction. This, again, is not something so new. Indeed, it's something old as idea. This was the Malthusian idea. If we take into consideration food and population, at some stage, population will have a limit with food. This was the old idea of Malthus. But if we go then as an analogy to nowadays, it's very close model, okay? There are limits. It's not maybe food anymore, but there are limits. Okay, is this true? So this is the premise that we are trying to prove. That if that model is correct, economic growth but plus population growth is creating environmental destruction. Well, what the evidence says. Let's look at data. Well, data are very clear. GDP, world GDP. So the human scale at planet level is becoming higher and higher. So economic scale into the planet is increasing a lot. So it is true that the economic activity is not reducing, it's increasing. Which is the immediate environmental impact of it? Well, the easiest is if we look at the energy. So energy is very much linked to the environment and to the environmental pressure, and we know that there is a direct correlation. The more we grow, the more energy we need. So it seems that it's true. And this is not particularly, let's say, surprising. If we want to grow, we need a lot of energy. We cannot not use it. What happens to the population? In a sense, even worse. The population in the planet is increasing a lot also, okay? And the forecasts are very clear. So if you look at history of human history, and you look at what will happen in the future, what is already happening nowadays, also from this point, it seems we have a problem. So, from all this point of view, and again, if we will link what is the immediate environmental impact of population, again energy, you will find a perfect correlation. The more population, the more energy we need. And if you look at the sources of energy we have nowadays, still the stock, what we use from non-renewable is a lot, with the consequence also on CO2 emission, on climate, etc., etc. So, it seems that the basic premise, if we have more economic activity, if we have more population, we may arrive at a very important environmental destruction, looks apparently quite true. In fact, if you also look at the IPCC report and you look at also other indicators of the environmental problems we are creating as humans, again we see that we are creating a lot of them, okay? And above all of the consequences we may have on the climate are all there. So, it's very clear that we have a problem. Do we have a solution? That's another point. But for the moment, let's make clear, we have a problem. And it's not only linked to the resources that are a stock that we expect. I started saying, okay, we know everything is a stock, has a limited life. We have to try to see how they will last, what technology will substitute them. Renewable, in principle, will last forever, but this is not true, okay? Also, from this point of view, we have a big problem. Biodiversity is disappearing very, very quickly. Everybody is talking about climate change. That is a very important problem, of course, but very few people talk about biodiversity loss, that in reality is a very, very, very big problem, okay? We are destroying and making a lot of species disappear every day. A big percentage of Earth biodiversity is disappearing. So the problem becomes bigger and bigger, okay? We have problem from whatever side. We have more economic, so the famous scale from where I started in the model became really too big. We still act as in the cowboy economy, no frontier, no limit, no problem. And this is creating a big problem because we are destroying everything. Okay, so it is clear why sustainable development was invented at a certain stage. Okay? As I said, a lot of people already were thinking about these issues, but officially it was invented in 1987, a famous Bradland report, where the definition was a bit ambiguous. If you look at it, it says, what sustainable development is development that meets the need of present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. So, what is there? Environment? No. There is no specific reference to the environment. It is clear that it's human-centric, so sustainable development is for whom? For humans. Which humans? Future generation, that's important, okay? It's not only the present generation. Economists normally talk about what we have to do now, or in the next decades, maybe, but never in the very, very long run. Here there is a clear statement. We have to consider future generations, so ethics, as you will see later with Catherine L. Ethics enter into the game, because this is an ethical issue. We have to consider future generation, and what we have to consider, their needs. That's an important keyword, because we cannot know preferences of future generation, though what they would like, we don't know. But we can imagine what they would need. Clean water, food, clean environment. They will have some basic needs, some material needs, also some non-material needs, some kind of spiritual or ethical, etc., to be free. So, all this type of material and non-material needs we can imagine, we have to think about this because they are basically objective needs, and we have to try to guarantee them for the future. So again, the environment is not there explicitly, but it can enter into play because it is a basic need. Okay? Clean air, clean water, food are basic needs. How sustainable development end up in a sense? Even in the same period of Brundtland report, there was this other definition that is very popular among politicians. What sustainable development is? Well, look at this very carefully. Maximize simultaneously biological system goals, economic system goals, social system goals. So, here it's a bit clear. There are at least three dimensions. The environmental one, okay, all the biological system, the economic dimension, the social dimension. This is very classical. No? Nowadays, when we think about sustainable development, everybody thinks at least at these three basic dimensions. Environmental, economic, social. But here there is what politicians like. Maximize simultaneously. Is this possible? That's exactly the basic concept that multi-criteria decision analysis is using. When we use different dimensions, different criteria, the model at the same time, we get a problem. We cannot get everything. This is also the basic message of economics. No? It was called, in the old times, the sad science. Why it is sad? Because the basic question was, we cannot get everything, so what we have not to have. Okay? So that's very sad. So we have to not to have things. And multi-criteria analysis is exactly saying this. Okay, I would like to have a very nice flat in Yerevan looking in the city center, looking at Ararat every day, like I'm very fascinating each time I enter the university looking at the mountains. Wonderful. I imagine that this is not that cheap, okay? So, if I would like to have a very nice flat in the city center with a nice view, with a lot of square meters, etc., this have a quite big cost. So, having everything maximized simultaneously is not something easy to get. And this again is the main message of multi-criteria decision analysis. You can see immediately applies to sustainable development. We have many dimensions, we have many criteria, many indicators to consider. Please consider that this creates an immediate consequence. We cannot get that. Without going to what multi-criteria decision analysis said, I find an example that probably is closer to the background of most of you. This is Sadi Carnot. And he had very clear what a perfect engine is. And he said, we should not expect ever to utilize in practice all the motive power of combustibles. That's very important. He said we cannot get everything, we cannot maximize something, just one aspect, the power of engine, because we'll be stupid, because we have to consider the economy, the safety of the engine, the strength, but not only the strength, the durability, because I can have a very powerful engine, but it will last one day. That doesn't work. Very practical, the space it occupies, the cost of installation. So, which is the perfect engine according to Sadi Carnot? We have to find a balance between all the different aspects of what a good engine might be. This is exactly what applies to sustainable development. It cannot be to maximize simultaneously everything. As multi-criteria decision analysis in mathematical terms, and if you want, Sadi Carnot again, already in very intuitive terms, made very clear, when we have multidimensional issues, multidimensional concepts, what we can look for is a balanced solution. That by definition is not a perfect solution, it's not maximize simultaneously everything. This is multi-criteria decision, it's called compromise solution. It's very interesting word from a semantic point of view. Compromise. It was invented by mathematicians, it's not a philosophy, okay? From the mathematical point of view, when you have you have a multidimensional optimization, is not optimization in the classical sense anymore, is looking for compromise solution. In intuitive terms, this means a balanced solution, no? Something that is not only good in environmental terms or in economic terms, but there is a trade-off, okay? It's something that is reasonably good in all these aspects. So, sustainability. Now, if we want to implement it, we have some basic questions. Sustainability of what? Sustainability for whom? Because what means whom? Okay? Which dimension? The environmental, the economic, the social, etc. If we go dimension by dimension, this means what, but also means whom. Which stakeholders will be supporting one solution or another? So you see, it's very complex from the technical point of view, but immediately from the social point of view. At which cost? Nothing comes for free. This is the basic message that economics teaches. For how long? That's also a very important point, okay? Sustainability then, of what? For whom? At which cost? How long? For what, for whom? Okay, that's very clear words came from famous book, Development Betrayed, by Richard Norgard, is a scientist in Berkeley. It said, well, what whom? Consumers want consumption sustained. Workers want jobs sustained, and so on and so forth. So everybody of us has a clear idea of what is important. And we would like to have that particular aspect of the life be sustained forever. But of course, this means we have again a conflict. There is a kind of social conflict, okay? So again, we have to look for compromises. It's very clear. In a few words, it describes it very well, the issue. For what? For sustainability of what means sustainability for whom? So basically, whatever sustainability issues in practice we want to deal with, we have to consider the social aspects behind it. Okay? Who are the social actors, who are the stakeholders, what they would like to have implemented. Is a good idea to do what some of them want, or we have to consider them all and how we do it. So it's not easy. At which cost? I found these two books, they are very interesting because they, both of them have in their title the word prosperity. One is saying prosperity without growth. It's a very recent one. No? So say, okay, some people think the sustainable development, meaning that, as we say, the growing of the economy is creating a problem. No, it will create a problem at some stage, probably it already created. So they said, okay, we have to try to have a prosperity in the planet, but limiting or even degrowing, reducing growth. There's another book that is more classical, a bit some decades ago, but had the same word in the title. The Political Economy of Prosperity. And what the two books are saying, it's again clear which is the cost. Because if we want to reduce growth, what will happen is that we will have a lot of unemployment. This is very clear. If you look at these graphics, it's very clear. From one side, you have growth rate, okay? Not in absolute terms, in growth rate. In that specific moment, which was the growth rate of the economy. And you have the change in unemployment rate. It is very clear that if you want a low unemployment rate, you need a higher growth rate. And this is a Nobel Prize in Economics, James Tobin said, is one of the most reliable empirical regularities of macroeconomics. So it is very clear, okay? We might reduce the growth rate of the economy at the stage, with the current state of the art, with the current technology, what we will have a lot of unemployment. So nothing comes for free, okay? From one side you have economic growth, from the other side you have unemployment. The higher the economic growth, the less people are unemployed. The lower the economic rate, the more people are unemployed. And you see, and you know that unemployment is very important social problem, not only economic. Again, environment and economy are not that easy to measure. We have often conflict. At which cost? Again, this is a book I loved because it's an historian, the collapse of complex societies. And Joseph Tanter, he makes an overview of many very complex societies like the Roman Empire, the Chinese Empire, etc. And all of them had something common. They get destroyed when they put all the efforts to try to avoid collapse. The Chinese building the Great Wall, the Roman Empire trying to defend all the frontiers they could from barbarians, and this meant that all energy went there and the society collapsed. So that's an interesting paradox. What we have to do? Because apparently history teaches us that when you try to save yourself, to put your energy in saving the status quo, you get a collapse. So, how long? Again, here there are many possible answers, and all of them are reasonable. Keynes, that was one of the most famous, probably, economists never lived, said, okay, in the long run, we are all dead. Very, very famous statement. So he said, you can see this in many ways. The future is not important, but this is not what he meant. He meant something different. In the future, we are all dead, so what we have to do is try to act as much as possible now. We have not to wait. So in sustainability terms, Keynes is saying something also very important. We cannot wait that things will solve by themselves. Things do not solve by themselves. You have to do something. But this statement also was a bit fuzzy, because also can mean that, okay, how long we consider. If in the long run we are all dead, future generation maybe are not that important. This becomes a bit fuzzy. That's the reason why, again, Nicholas Georgescu-Regens says something very, very important thing in terms of sustainable development. Society is an immortal body. If you think in these terms, everything changes. For example, discounting the future. Does this have a meaning or not? Many studies about trying to avoid climate change, they said, okay, how many lives we save if we reduce CO2 emission? Now, we have an obvious issue. The issue is, the cost is now, okay? The cost is now, the benefit is in the future. So, how worthy is a human life in the future? That's, again, a very set question, but if you start discounting, meaning that something in the future has a lower value, that again, for us as human beings, this makes sense. We are all mortal, so we try to get as much as we can very close to us. But if we are an immortal society, so the component of the society are mortal, but the society as such is immortal, Armenian society will exist in coming centuries. The component of it, unfortunately, not the current components, but the society as such, it will exist. So, if we enter in this way of thinking, things becomes a bit clearer, okay? So, we have to consider the possibility, the consequences of what we do now, considering as we were living forever. Okay? Because this creates very different solutions to the problem. Because the first conflict is not only between different social actors, it's also between current generation, future generation. If we think, as Keynes said, in the long run we are all dead, this means that it makes sense, rational decision is to get benefits now, cost in the future. This is one of the criticisms that environmentalists do to nuclear power, for example. No? We get the energy now, but the waste active for centuries. So we are shifting the cost to future generation. It's an issue, okay? So we have to consider this different way of thinking that makes probably sustainable development clearer. But what we can then conclude from this is that it's a very complex issue. There are not easy answers. Please escape for simple answers to complex problems. The first premise is this very complex issue. We have to think a lot before we state clear messages. This is Charles Dickens. I like this A Tale of Two Cities, because it states it was the worst of all times, it was the best of all times, etc. etc. Everything was positive or everything was negative, depends if you lived in London or in Paris. So the point of view is very important. Everything can be good or can be bad, depends from which perspective you look at it. This is the basic premise of complex system theory. And again, it's very common, clearly, it's a common sense, okay? He was a writer, he got perfectly clear what a complex system is. No simple solution, because the easiest solution is carrying capacity. Carrying capacity is something that in ecology works very well. The premise was, okay, if we have more economic activity, if we have more population, okay, at some stage we destroy the planet. What we can do? Somebody with the background in ecology would say, let's apply the concept of carrying capacity that basically means, given a given species, I don't know, frogs, how many of them can live in an ecosystem, in a specific lake, for example? This in ecological terms can be answered. Can we answer these questions for humans? What do you think? It would be easy, no? At some stage we saw, okay, we have a problem, we have more and more humans in the planet. These humans need a lot of energy. This energy is putting a lot of pressure on the planet. Okay, how many humans can live? Let's decide that we can put a limit, theoretical limit, and then how to implement is a different thing. But could we answer this question? The answer is no, it's impossible. Let's start from there, okay? There is no way to clearly answer these questions for humans, because humans have a very important characteristic. They use exosomatic energy, not only endosomatic. What means? The kilocalories we get from food is our endosomatic energy. The energy we used to arrive in Yerevan from our cities is exosomatic. The point is that the exosomatic use of energy for humans is very, very big. In average, the fuel consumption per passengers is 3 liters, 4.5 for 100 kilometer. So it means that if you fly, I don't know, from South America to Europe, we are talking about 2 million kilocalories, more or less. That is more than a person living in countryside, you know, if you consider an indigenous person, for example, in Amazonia, is more than he or she is using all her life. So, it's not easy, okay? So again, the point is humans, but at which lifestyle? So the exosomatic component of our lifestyle creates the most important part of that. So again, we can reverse the issue. It's not carrying capacity anymore. Which is the impact of this population? So on what sustainability depends? Depends on how many people we are considering, but even more important, at which lifestyle, affluence. So PAT means population, affluence, technology. How many people and which lifestyle, technology, which is their level of technology development. Because of course, as we saw from the beginning, the more you recycle, for example, the less you create a pressure to the environment. So the technology component is more and more important. So an optimistic answer to the Malthusian problem is that technology can save us. The other possible answer is our lifestyle. We should in a way reduce a bit as much as we possible our exosomatic use. But as we saw, this will create an economic cost. So we have to balance all these characteristics. Of course, depends also on the absolute number of our population. Which are the attempts to measure it? For example, one attempt was, let's put into the measuring of the GDP, gross domestic product, something that normally is considered in positive terms into negative terms. For example, defensive expenses. What they mean? Let's imagine that you live close to a freeway. So you have a lot of noise. To protect yourself from this noise, you get a wall, a glass wall. Okay? This glass wall is increasing the GDP of your country. So it's measured in positive terms by the statistical office. Some national accountants, particularly one in Germany in the 70s, Christian Leiber, said, oh, this is wrong, because in reality this is a cost. So, because there is an environmental problem, I have to try to defend from the environmental problem. The same for the contamination in cities, etc. So all these components are not really positive. They are measured, there is a paradox. They are measured as positive, but they should be negative. Then you discover that the famous GDP is lower than expected. If you reduce this cost instead of considering them in positive terms, in reality we are not growing so much as we think. So this is a first way to think to the problem, okay? Apparently we are saying that we are growing, we are looking at this, all of this in positive terms, in economic terms, but in reality is not the truth, because all this type of actions that we require to protect ourselves from the environmental problems are creating a false growth. Now, that's something interesting to think about. Very popular indicator is the ecological footprint. That is a lot of success because it's simple. In scientific terms, it's very naive, I would say. Because the idea is, let's transform all our activities into land. So, for example, if we consider a city, can this city live by itself? No. This in the Middle Ages was already very well known. What we can do? Well, we need to import food. We need to export waste. Okay? So, if we consider all the categories we need as an economy, as a city, as a region, as a country, so how much fossil fuel we need, how much we have as buildings, how much food we need, how much wood we would like to have for CO2 absorption, we can transform all these categories into land. So ecological footprint is saying, okay, which is the footprint, the environmental footprint of our economies, and it is very big. This is very, journalists like it a lot, because they say, okay, we are already after 100 days in the year, we are already living outside our boundaries. It's a metaphor. Don't take this as a scientific indicator, but as a metaphor, it's very interesting. It's saying again, we are living more than we can outside our borders, our limits, because we use the resources coming from the past. At some stage, this will be stopped. That's an interesting correlation. This is the the Human Development Index. That is very interesting index because it's considering the economic performance together with the social performance, okay? So how healthy a population is, the level of education, etc. And we are considering the ecological footprint. That's an interesting point. The higher the Human Development Index is, so not only the economic, okay, the way, the quality of life of population. So we are using a more comprehensive concept, quality of life. The higher the quality of life is, the higher the ecological footprint is. So what would be here? Sustainable development quadrant is almost empty. Right? There is no example of high Human Development Index with a low ecological footprint. This makes very clear the point. It's not easy. That's the reason why almost all approaches think about using a plurality of indicators. That's the only thing we can do, okay? It's a very complex concept. We have a lot of environmental issues, ecological issues, economic issues, social issues, don't forget. It's a conflict if you try to consider only some of the dimensions. We have to consider all the problem as a multidimensional issue, and let's try to see what happens when we use all these possible indicators. We have many of these attempts. One of the classical one was the Environmental Sustainability Index, used by the World Economic Forum. We have the Sustainable Development Goals that are supported by the United Nations, very popular nowadays. There are a lot of goals. You see, sustainability is not seen as only an environmental issue. No poverty, zero hunger, okay? So it's multi-dimensional. Each one of these objectives, of these goals, is measured with a lot of different indicators. So it begins a very complex multidimensional issue, but very relevant, okay? We cannot consider just one point of view. Remember what Charles Dickens said, okay? Environmental performance index is very recent. It's the evolution of the environmental sustainability index. You see, it uses really a lot of indicators, and you might get again a ranking of which are the most or less sustainable countries. Why this is useful? Well, it's more, kind of message for some country to say you have to do more. It's difficult to find which is a clear message from a ranking, but to have a picture like this saying your own country, how it's performing according all this plurality of indicators, they are using 58 indicators, quite a lot, gives interesting messages on how to act. Okay, I think I will stop here. Just one positive message. Some people say that we might get something like this, that it's an interesting point, that instead of growing and going to the limits, at some stage we might go more like that, okay? That in reality, when an economy becomes well developed, there are more demand for environmental quality, for green technologies, for different lifestyles. The consumers are more concerned, and this in reality may create lower environmental impact. So it's very positive message, no? That in reality growth is not being so bad for the environment forever, but at some stage this becomes better. Of course, the message is very positive, and it's very, again, if I would be a politician, I would buy this very easily, but it's very arguable. For example, one issue is considering things more, for some, let's say, for some, depends on the indicator you use. For some indicators, it's true, it applies, for others, doesn't apply. So if you consider water pollution, is true. The more the economy is developed, the less problem you have with water. So it's true. The environmental is improving, but it's not true, for example, not that clear for air pollution. It's not that clear at all for CO2 emission, is exactly the opposite. And there are many explanations. One of the explanations is the so-called Jevons paradox, saying, again, complexity. Dematerialization of the economy. Some people say, okay, but now growth is not that material anymore. In the past, we had computers that were big, very, very big. Nowadays, we have, tablet, mobile phones. They are much powerful than the computer that was used to go to the moon. So, in reality, we are using so much less environmental resources, the famous air from where I started with, that this is positive. But the real point is that this is true in relative terms, not in absolute terms. In the past, where computers were so big, there were very few of them in the world. Now think how many mobile phones, tablets, portable computers we have. So in reality, efficiency per unit creates a higher impact in absolute terms, because the price is becoming much lower, and then people increase the demand. So it's not true, basically, okay? Efficiency per unit is good, but what is creating is a massive use of it. Is this good or bad? Imagine no mobile phone, no social media, no current society. So difficult. The clear environmental solution is to have tablet with the price of an old computer. So very few computers in the world. From the environmental point of view, this would be good, but not necessarily from the social point of view. So basically, if you look at the intensity of energy contained per unit of GDP nowadays, it's true. Per unit of GDP, we use much less energy. But as we saw from the beginning, the higher the GDP, the more we use energy in absolute terms. In fact, it's true. Okay? Because it's true, per unit of GDP is less energy intensive, but in absolute terms, the energy demand is much higher. So this is again a paradox, and again not an easy solution. We know where the problem is. The solution is also very easy. You get a lot of taxation on some goods, and then the environmental impact will be reduced. Is this good or bad? Not an easy question, not to answer. As I said, please consider that there is now no easy solution. I stop. Another issue regarding the Kuznets curve is exactly the so-called hidden flow. So, what seems that developed economies do is not that they use less material goods, but simply that they import. If you consider all we import from other countries, and if you consider all the environmental consequences of transportation, CO2, so the local production plus transportation, etc., you see that in reality the material used by the given economy is much higher than it seems. So it is not that true, the famous inverted Kuznets curve, okay? It seems it is true, depends if you just make a picture of what is happening in a given economy, developed economy, without considering all the hidden flow of materials. So I just finished this saying that probably a good solution might come from technology, but it should be really a revolutionary technology. Horses were the most important source of environmental problem 1 century ago, okay? And the problem was solved by car. It was completely a so big change. Everything was different, okay? But as you know, cars are now a big problem, okay? We are what was, say, biological problem created by horses, nowadays is created by cars. CO2 emission, air contamination, air pollution, etc., etc. How we solve it? Maybe we need not to have more efficient car, we need a completely different means of transportation. So a lot of things to think about, but the most important message is consider there are no win-win solutions. They are all complex issues. Refrain from simple answers. Thank you very much.
I was just worried that said horse was a problem for the society. Then I see no, it's horse.
Horse.
That was not a problem. So questions for Giuseppe? There are so many important thoughts and so many important messages. I believe that you want to clarify something or eventually disagree or put a different perspective. Anybody? Thank you for, you understand. Thank you for showing a different reality, just translating to the others. Anybody else?
Any disagreement, very welcome.
Well, so it was left to me. So Giuseppe, some things for you to consider. Somehow you painted a very grim situation of the world in terms of pressure on natural resources and all the things that our pattern of living standards create. But we need to understand that we are living better nowadays. Our life expectancy improved everywhere.
Famous human development.
Yeah, and that has consequences. So the issue that you mentioned has a more important correlation with population growth, because the population growth and the living expectancy is in itself something unsustainable, or we can imagine that, as you presented in that equation, that technology will always bring answers to adjust for these new challenges. For example, in the 70s, we had the picture that the oil would be over soon, and then our economy would be severely impacted. And what we see nowadays is that our new reserves have been discovered, and we are shifting from fossil fuel to other fuels, and then we have abundance of oil, you're right? And but the technology is presenting us with new solutions. And my final point to push you on this is that all this pressure, when you see these human development index and so on and so forth, is created by far a less portion of the population in the world in comparison to the vast majority that is less accountable for this impact. And the point that I have already asked in the past for in the conference last year in the agency is this: is the Europeans and the North Americans prepared to go down the curve so that the global south, for example, can enjoy better living standards? What do you think about those comments?
Okay, first of all, premise, as Horst said yesterday, this is what I think, not what the European Commission thinks, okay? So I prefer to talk in a very free way. If you ask me, okay, everything is in the Polarlic equation, population, affluence, technology. Everything is there. If you ask me, what is better, to have a lot of population in the planet living at minimum standard of life, because this population affluence basically means the higher the population, the less the affluence, because at some stage otherwise it will be impossible. So, in theory, I would say it's better to have a lower population with a higher standard of life, of living. How you do it? that's quite... So this is very theoretical answer. In practice, how you can avoid that people have children, or would be a kind of society that I would not like. I mean, you have to go really into the freedom of people, liberty, etc. So in theory, yes, and also historically, population has always been, let's say, as you saw in the graphics, has always been a very much lower quantity of people. So, okay, would be better. Probably yes, how you get this. In the past it was through epidemics, through wars, birth control. All this solution for me would be worst. So my personal opinion is, in theory, less population. How you get there, I don't think is a good solution. So what you can get? Affluence, yes. So you should try to have part of the population living at higher standard of life, and the other probably at least not increasing more. But even okay, if whatever economists would say this would be crazy for the economy, etc., even ecologists, I was explained, that think this is impossible, because whatever living organism, living population, has a kind of inherent incentive to grow till you arrive at carrying capacity. Again, which is the carrying capacity of humans, we don't know. So, not easy. So, well, if you consider all ethical aspects and practical consequences, the easy answer and the optimistic view of the future is look at technology. Because of course you have the hope that this will create a win-win solution. As far as I know, no energy source is really creating this at the moment, because basically the point is energy. So I'm not particularly optimistic from this point of view. And regarding peak oil, depends again, because the barrel the point of peak oil, as you know better than I do, is not the absolute terms. It's what we can have relatively for our population, how you can extract per day. So it's true, we have a lot of oil in the ground, but what we can extract per day is more or less already peak. So this means that the more you have a population, also oil is creating a constraint, probably. So, not easy, yeah?
Can I ask a question, please? Oh, yes, please. 7 seconds.
In all of this discussion, of course, the issue of demographics. We know demographers are predicting that we will peak in population. We're already seeing China facing, dire prospects in terms of its economic capacity and the population decline. So a lot of the prediction is that we will cap at 10 billion, 11 billion, 12 billion. Is the highest number I've read. After that, it may actually decline because of improved economic conditions. The wealthier an economy is, the less children they have. How does this impact this whole sustainability discussion? I don't want to open up all big, but this is a factor that we need to keep in mind, that in next 50, 60 years, it will be a different demographic reality for the planet. Humans will not be growing at the exponential rate they've been growing in the past.
No, that's for sure, but 12 billions is not a small number.
Two points that I want to comment on that. I was attending a course of the United Nations Staff College System, and some projection from the MacArthur Foundation was more or less indicating that we should come back to the population we had in the 70s, more or less. That was considered to be close to a sustainable number, and that would be 4 billion people, more or less, 4 or 5 billion people. But there are many projections, many ideas, and that. But what you just did not describe was the creative destruction. You jumped that slide. Would like to have your views on what that means, because I have read that in a book, and that was something that was pushed forward as something that we should pursue, the creative destruction.
Yeah, by the way, the founder of this theory was an Austrian economist, Joseph Schumpeter. And his idea is interesting in the sense that say that when it seems that we collapse, in reality this is even good. Because what you create is a completely different society that often is better. And this basically is creative destruction in this sense. Because what is a bit what Joseph Thunder says about complex society. We do everything to sustain what we know, okay? That is our current society, and often this completely destroy it, because we are so obsessed in trying to get there that we collapse, because from the energetic point of view, we put all the energies there, and that's the end. Schumpeter has a completely different view. Let's collapse, because this will create something new. And often in history, this something new is better. And if you say this in technological terms, for example, when we were very close to collapse, because we cannot imagine what was living in a city where all the transport was by horses. It was terrible. You get the epidemics very easy, you get whatever. It was really terrible. We were very close to collapse. And then, Henry Ford invented the car, and things went in a completely different situation. So, his idea is that the societal constraints are also putting some pressure on people to invent new things, and all this creates completely new societies that in principle might be better. Again, you can see everything in a pessimistic view, no? In Malthusian terms means we are collapsing, full stop. In more optimistic point of view, we have solution. We have technological solution. We might have a spontaneous solution, having a way of life that is more compatible with the environment. We might have different policies with some ethical connotation like population control. Obviously, if I would be a planner, the bifurcation is as much population at the minimum standard of life and minimum population at maximum standard of life is not easy. If I could plan this, I don't think nobody can really control. Even in China, they tried to have this single, but it was not fully respected. Not easy. That's really the only thing I can say at the moment. Do not exist very clear-cut solution. And when you act at local level, don't forget that the basic questions are sustainability of what means sustainability of whom. Without involving social actors, you have troubles, or you are imposing not democratic points of view, okay? Because what means who? Which cost? Always there is a cost. Win-win solution at the moment do not exist. And of course, which is your time horizon? I think these 4 questions, in my view, they create a very interesting framework to think about. No simple solution. That's very clear.
Thank you.
Thank you, Giuseppe. I think that the structure of the training course follows very nicely now because Giuseppe raised a lot of social and ethical concerns, and this is what we will have with Catrinel, that should dig a bit more on these aspects, because now coming back to our exercise, where will be a lot of room for discussing these things. As we are behind the schedule, I have a little suggestion to make you. I'm not sure if there is a problem with the organization, but I would suggest, instead of having a half an hour break, we should have a 15 minutes break right now, so that you can breathe a little bit and refresh your mind while we upload the presentation from Catrinel. But I will be very tough on the time. It's just 15 minutes break, okay?